I'd taken rough jobs before, but nothing like the one that morning. A week of repairing a trader's busted wagon, chasing down his stray horses, and hauling crates across miles of dry country. By the end of it, my shoulders felt like stone and my hands were torn open from rope burn. All I wanted was the few coins he'd promised, enough to keep my ranch running for another month. But when he dug around in that wagon, he didn't reach for it. She simply stood there, waiting to see if I would become yet another man who saw her as something to own. I stepped closer, hands raised slowly so she wouldn't think I meant her harm. She stiffened, breath catching as I reached for the rough rope at her wrists. The knots were tight, cutting into her skin. When I touched them, she flinched, but didn't pull away. "There," I said softly as I loosened the rope and slid it free. "You're not tied to anyone now." She held her wrists against her chest, rubbing the tender skin. Her breath trembled, just once, before she smothered it and looked away. "You're free to go," I told her. The trader snorted and climbed onto his wagon, clearly glad to be rid of both responsibility and guilt. The horses jolted forward, leaving a cloud of dust and the woman standing silent in the middle of the empty road. She didn't run. Didn't even look around. Instead, she whispered, barely audible, but enough to freeze me. "If I leave now, they'll find me again." I didn't know who they were yet, but the fear behind her voice wasn't imagined. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke, and she wrapped her arms around herself, not for warmth, but protection. I gave her space, keeping my tone soft. "You can come to my ranch. Just until you're safe. No one will own you there." For the first time, her eyes lifted fully to mine. A flicker of disbelief. Then something gentler, maybe hope, maybe relief. Hard to tell. We walked to my horse slowly. When I helped her mount, my hand brushed her forearm, warm, tense, alive with a tremor of uncertainty. She didn't recoil. She simply held her breath for a moment, as if testing whether she could trust the world again. By the time I swung into the saddle behind her, I knew one thing for certain: I hadn't accepted a payment. I'd accepted a responsibility, and maybe the beginning of something that was going to change both of our lives. The ride back to my ranch was quiet, almost too quiet. Not the awkward kind, but a silence shaped by caution, by the weight of everything she wasn't ready to say. She sat in front of me on the saddle, her posture tall and composed, even though I could feel tension in the way her shoulders held. Every time the horse shifted, she steadied herself with controlled grace, not clinging, not leaning back into me, just maintaining her own space with quiet dignity. A warm breeze lifted strands of her black hair, brushing them softly against my cheek. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't ignore the contrast between her steady exterior and the small signs of vulnerability slipping through, the tight grip she kept on the saddle horn, the way her breath hitched whenever a branch cracked nearby, her eyes flicking sharply toward distant sounds, assessing threats I couldn't even hear. This wasn't someone broken. This was someone wounded but unyielding, holding herself together because she'd had no choice. The trail opened into a stretch of golden grassland. The sun warmed our backs, and I saw her shoulders relax, just a little. "You cold?" I asked gently, noticing the way she rubbed her forearms. She shook her head, but the truth was in her shiver. I slid off my coat and draped it around her. My fingers brushed her upper arm, skin warm from the sun, muscles tense beneath. She froze for half a heartbeat. Then she let out a slow, steady exhale, accepting the coat and, maybe more importantly, the kindness behind it. "Thank you," she murmured, voice rough from disuse. It was the first time she'd spoken voluntarily. A small thing, but it settled into my chest like a spark lighting dry tinder. When we reached the ranch, she hesitated at the gate, her steps slowing as if an invisible boundary lay before her. I walked ahead a few paces before noticing she'd stopped. "You all right?" I asked. She looked at the modest house, the barn, the fenced pasture. Not fearful, just unsure. Like she didn't want to enter a place she had no right to. "This is your home," she said quietly, as though stepping across that line might take something away from me. "And you're safe here," I replied. "That's all that matters." Her gaze softened, not visibly, but in a way I felt more than saw. She followed me inside, moving with graceful, cautious steps, scanning everything like she needed to memorize escape routes. I didn't crowd her. I let her explore the space with her eyes, the wooden table, the fire pit, the worn saddle sitting in the corner. Simple things, honest things. Things that didn't threaten. She lingered near the window, watching the open land as if she were still choosing whether to stay. "You can rest," I said gently. "No one will force you to work. No one will tie you down." She turned toward me, one hand resting lightly on the windowsill. A long, considering look passed between us. Not trust, not yet. But a step toward it. "I'll stay," she said at last. "For now." Those two words carried the weight of an agreement, a fragile truce between her fear and my promise. And as she moved to sit near the hearth, her shoulders seemed to ease for the first time since I'd met her, just enough to let a bit of light in. The days that followed fell into a rhythm neither of us planned but both of us settled into quietly. She woke early, earlier than me, and I'd find her outside at dawn, standing barefoot in the cool dirt, eyes closed, breathing in the stillness like it was something she'd been starved of. She didn't speak much. But she watched everything. When I fed the horses, she stood just close enough to observe my hands, how I held the rope, how I tied a knot, how I brushed the mare's coat with long, even strokes. Not as a student, but as someone trying to remember the feeling of normal life. By the third day, she joined me. No announcement. No question. She simply stepped beside me and reached for a second brush. Her movements were precise and elegant, like she'd done similar work before. But there was hesitation too. Her hand hovered for a moment above the horse's neck before she finally let the bristles touch down. The mare flinched at first, then relaxed as the woman's touch proved gentle, rhythmic, grounding. "You're good with her," I said softly. She didn't look at me, but the faintest warmth touched her expression. "Animals can feel intentions," she replied quietly. "If your heart is steady, they trust." I wondered if that was a message meant for the horse, or for me. Later that afternoon, while fixing a loose plank on the fence, our hands reached for the same hammer. My fingers brushed the back of her hand, a soft, warm contact that lasted no more than a second. But everything in that second changed. She stilled. I stilled. She didn't snatch her hand back, just looked at me, eyes dark, alert, unsure. Emotion flickered there, a mix of caution and something gentler, something she wasn't ready to name. Her breath deepened, slow and controlled, as though steadying a part of herself that wanted to tremble. I stepped back first, giving her space, but not breaking the connection in my voice. "Sorry," I murmured. "It's all right," she said, barely above a whisper. That evening, I found her sitting on the porch steps. Golden light warmed her face, outlining her in a soft glow. Her hair fell over her shoulder in a loose wave, moving slightly with the breeze. She didn't notice me at first, her gaze fixed on the horizon, watching the sun sink behind the hills. When she sensed my presence, she shifted just enough to make room for me beside her. It wasn't an invitation spoken aloud, but it was one she meant. I sat, careful not to crowd her. The space between us was small but respectful, close enough to feel her warmth, far enough that she didn't feel cornered. After a long stretch of quiet, she finally spoke. "My name," she said slowly, "is Aranya." The moment felt sacred. Not just because she'd told me her name, but because she'd chosen to share it with me, her truth, her identity, a piece of herself she'd guarded fiercely since the day I met her. "It's a beautiful name," I said gently. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw a hint of trust flicker in her eyes. Fragile. But real. And in that quiet, fading light, I realized something: we weren't strangers anymore. Not entirely. Something between us, soft, tentative, unspoken, had begun to take shape. The night it happened, the sky was heavy with clouds, no moon, no stars, just the quiet rasp of wind brushing against the cabin walls. I just settled into bed when a sharp, choked sound cut through the silence. Not loud, but filled with fear. I pushed open my door and found Aranya sitting upright near the dying fire, her knees pulled close, breath trembling. Sweat beaded along her temple, and she stared at the flames as though seeing something far more terrifying. Aranya? I stepped closer, slow and careful, not wanting to startle her. She didn't answer at first. Her breathing was uneven, chest rising too fast, fingers digging into her own arms as if anchoring herself. I crouched a short distance away. You're all right. It was just a dream. Her eyes flicked to mine, wide, haunted. No, she whispered. It wasn't just a dream. It was memory. For a moment, we said nothing. The fire crackled softly, outside, the wind sighed like an old ghost drifting through the plains. You don't have to tell me anything, I said gently. Not unless you're ready. A long silence followed. Then she exhaled shakily and nodded, as if deciding something inside herself. They came at dawn, she began, voice low and unsteady. Raiders. Men who knew the layout of our camp too well. Her fingers loosened slightly, though her shoulders remained tense. My tribe was preparing for the spring gathering. My father, she paused, swallowing hard. He is the chief. And I am his only child. I felt my breath catch. Not from the revelation itself, but from the quiet shame in her voice, as if being born into leadership made what happened to her somehow worse. They bound my hands before I could even reach for a weapon, she continued softly. They killed 2 guards. They took me because they believed my father would exchange anything to get me back. Her eyes lowered, lashes trembling. But once they realized no one was pursuing them, they sold me instead. I moved closer, only an inch, just enough to show she wasn't alone. Not touching yet, just presence. She pulled her knees tighter. I was supposed to bring honor to my people, she murmured. I was trained to lead in times of peace, to speak at councils, to guide the young. And yet, her voice cracked, the smallest fracture in her composed tone. Yet I couldn't even save myself. Softly, slowly, I reached out and placed my hand over hers. She stiffened at first, breath halting, but didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers relaxed under my touch, curling faintly as if drawing strength from it. Aranya, I said quietly, what happened to you wasn't weakness. It was violence. No one could have stopped it alone. For the first time, she lifted her eyes fully to mine. Raw. Unshielded. Vulnerability laid bare like an open wound she finally trusted me enough to show. Why are you being so kind to me, she whispered. Because you deserve kindness, I replied softly. And because you're safe now. I promise you that. A long, shaking breath left her. She leaned just slightly toward me, not a full embrace, not even a deliberate gesture. Just a small surrender, a quiet acceptance that someone else could help carry the weight. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was closeness. Real. Human. The kind that grows roots in silence before anyone realizes how deep they've gone. And as she finally allowed her head to rest near my shoulder, light as a falling leaf, I knew her walls hadn't just lowered. They'd let me in. The night it happened, the sky was heavy with clouds, no moon, no stars, just the quiet rasp of wind brushing against the cabin walls. I just settled into bed when a sharp, choked sound cut through the silence. Not loud. But filled with fear. I pushed open my door and found Aranya sitting upright near the dying fire, her knees pulled close, breath trembling. Sweat beaded along her temple, and she stared at the flames as though seeing something far more terrifying. Aranya? I stepped closer, slow and careful, not wanting to startle her. She didn't answer at first. Her breathing was uneven, chest rising too fast, fingers digging into her own arms as if anchoring herself. I crouched a short distance away. "You're all right. It was just a dream." Her eyes flicked to mine, wide, haunted. "No," she whispered. "It wasn't just a dream. It was memory." For a moment, we said nothing. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind sighed like an old ghost drifting through the plains. "You don't have to tell me anything," I said gently. "Not unless you're ready." A long silence followed. Then she exhaled shakily and nodded, as if deciding something inside herself. "They came at dawn," she began, voice low and unsteady. "Raiders. Men who knew the layout of our camp too well." Her fingers loosened slightly, though her shoulders remained tense. "My tribe was preparing for the spring gathering. My father," she paused, swallowing hard. "He is the chief. And I am his only child." I felt my breath catch. Not from the revelation itself, but from the quiet shame in her voice, as if being born into leadership made what happened to her somehow worse. "They bound my hands before I could even reach for a weapon," she continued softly. "They killed 2 guards. They took me because they believed my father would exchange anything to get me back." Her eyes lowered, lashes trembling. "But once they realized no one was pursuing them, they sold me instead." I moved closer, only an inch, just enough to show she wasn't alone. Not touching yet, just presence. She pulled her knees tighter. "I was supposed to bring honor to my people," she murmured. "I was trained to lead in times of peace, to speak at councils, to guide the young." And yet, her voice cracked, the smallest fracture in her composed tone. "Yet I couldn't even save myself." Softly, slowly, I reached out and placed my hand over hers. She stiffened at first, breath halting, but didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers relaxed under my touch, curling faintly as if drawing strength from it. "Aranya," I said quietly, "what happened to you wasn't weakness. It was violence. No one could have stopped it alone." For the first time, she lifted her eyes fully to mine. Raw. Unshielded. Vulnerability laid bare like an open wound she finally trusted me enough to show. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. "Because you deserve kindness," I replied softly. "And because you're safe now. I promise you that." A long, shaking breath left her. She leaned just slightly toward me, not a full embrace, not even a deliberate gesture. Just a small surrender, a quiet acceptance that someone else could help carry the weight. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was closeness. Real. Human. The kind that grows roots in silence before anyone realizes how deep they've gone. And as she finally allowed her head to rest near my shoulder, light as a falling leaf, I knew her walls hadn't just lowered. They'd let me in. Over the next few days, something subtle began to shift between us, nothing dramatic, nothing spoken aloud. Just a gentle weaving of lives that seemed to happen on its own, the way vines find each other in the wild without being told to. Aranya moved through the ranch with a quiet assurance now. Not as a guest. Not as someone hiding from the world. But as a person rediscovering her place in it. In the mornings, she joined me before sunrise. I'd find her outside stretching in slow, deliberate motions, movements that looked like a blend of ritual and healing. When she caught me watching, she didn't shy away anymore. She simply offered a soft nod, acknowledging my presence. And every day, we found ourselves working side by side. Shared routines, shared silence. When we brushed the horses, she no longer hesitated. She spoke softly to them in her language, gentle phrases that made the animals tilt their heads as if listening to an old friend. I watched the way her fingers moved through their coats, firm yet soothing. "You talk to them like they're people," I teased gently one morning. She smirked, an actual smirk, and shrugged. Sometimes they listen better. I didn't know which amazed me more, the smirk or the fact that she felt safe enough to joke. Later, during breakfast, she sat across from me at the wooden table. The sunlight warmed her shoulders, and she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear with an unconscious grace that tightened something in my chest. We didn't talk much, but the silences felt comfortable now. Companionable. Like we'd built a small world where words weren't always necessary. Learning from each other one afternoon, as we saddled a colt who didn't yet trust the reins, Aranya stepped close, her hand brushing my forearm as she reached for the buckle. It wasn't intentional, but the moment her skin touched mine, a quiet spark flared between us. Warm. Brief. Undeniable. She blinked once, a gentle flush rising beneath her cheekbones, but didn't move away. "I want to learn how you do this," she said. Her voice carried a soft earnestness that pulled me in. So I showed her, guiding her hands lightly, careful not to linger too long even though my instincts wanted to. She listened to every detail, absorbing the process with an attentiveness that felt deeper than curiosity. There was something meaningful in being close to her like this. Not romantic yet, just honest human closeness. The kind that grows slowly, under steady light. The first real laugh later that day, while repairing a squeaky barn door, I told her a story about my clumsy neighbor who'd once tried to ride a mule backward because he swore it improved the view. I didn't expect more than a polite smile. But Aranya laughed, really laughed. Soft at first, then unable to stop herself. Her eyes warmed, her posture relaxed, and for a moment she looked like someone who had never known fear or loss. The sound filled the ranch like music. I stared longer than I should have. She noticed. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away with a shy breath. "You're staring." "I know," I admitted quietly. "I'm sorry." "No," she hesitated. "It's all right." A quiet moment under the moon that evening, as the sky turned violet, we sat on the porch again, shoulders nearly touching. She leaned just slightly toward me, letting her weight rest close enough for warmth to pass between us. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I feel lighter here." I didn't reach for her hand, though I wanted to. I simply said, "I'm glad." The ranch felt different with her beside me. Softer. Warmer. Alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Whatever was growing between us, fragile, slow, unspoken, it was real. And neither of us seemed willing to step away from it. Peace on the ranch had a fragile quality to it, like a thin layer of morning frost that could melt with the first harsh touch of daylight. And the daylight arrived sooner than we wanted. It started with small signs. Tracks near the far fence. A broken twig that shouldn't have snapped on its own. A distant whistle carried by the wind, too purposeful to be the sound of nature. Aranya noticed first. We were repairing the pig pen when she suddenly went still, her eyes narrowing toward the tree line. The breeze stirred her hair, but she didn't seem to feel it. Every muscle in her body tightened at once, like a bow being drawn. "What is it?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer at first. Just listened. Listened the way someone listens for familiar danger. Then she whispered, "They're close." Those two words chilled the air around us. Fear in the air for the rest of the day, her movements lost the softness she'd gained over the past week. She walked with the alert precision of someone trained to sense threats. Her hand hovered near the small pendant around her neck, a carved token her father had given her. "Aranya," I said gently as we worked in the barn, "we don't know that it's them." Her jaw tensed. Danger doesn't always show its face. But I can feel it. I didn't doubt her. She had instincts I'd learned to trust. That evening, clouds rolled in, dark and heavy, as if the sky itself knew what was coming. I checked the rifle near the door, not because I wanted to use it, but because protecting her had become instinctive, an unspoken promise I'd made long before I fully understood what she meant to me. Aranya watched me from the porch, her silhouette outlined by the fading sun. When I joined her, she didn't move away. Instead, she rested her hand briefly against my arm, just a touch, soft but deliberate. It wasn't fear. It was reassurance. For both of us. The scouts arrived. The sound reached us before the figures did, distant hooves striking dry earth. Aranya straightened, her breath catching. I stepped in front of her without thinking, a reflex born of weeks of quiet closeness. But she gently placed her hand on my back and moved to stand beside me. Not behind. Beside. As the riders emerged from the shadows, my pulse spiked. 3 men on horses approached cautiously, wearing clothing marked with Apache symbols. Their eyes were sharp, their expressions stern, assessing. Aranya stepped forward, her posture transforming in an instant. She wasn't the quiet guest on my ranch anymore. She was someone important. Someone born to lead. One of the scouts dismounted, staring at her in disbelief. "Tsa Lee Aranya," he breathed, calling her by a name I hadn't heard before, one spoken with reverence. She nodded once, steady. And he dropped to one knee. Relief washed through him, but confusion washed through me. Who exactly had been in my home all this time? Caught between worlds, the scout explained that her tribe had searched tirelessly. They'd found signs of raiders heading west, then lost the trail. They'd feared the worst. And now, seeing her alive, they were ready to bring her home immediately. Aranya's hand tightened lightly around the pendant. She stepped back toward me, just a small shift, but enough for the scouts to notice. "I will go," she said softly. "But not tonight." The leader looked between us and nodded respectfully, understanding more than either of us had spoken aloud. Before they left to make camp nearby, Aranya turned to me. Her eyes carried fear, yes, but also determination, and something far deeper. "I won't disappear," she promised. "Not without speaking to you first." Her words settled in my chest like a weight I wasn't sure I was ready for. Because the threat wasn't just the raiders anymore. It was the possibility of losing her. Dawn broke slowly over the horizon, pouring soft gold over the ranch house, the fields, and the mountains beyond. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation and something even heavier, truth. After everything they had survived together, after the violence, the sacrifice, the confessions, the rescue, there was still one final moment they could not avoid. And it began the instant Elena walked onto the porch, her long black hair brushing against the shoulders of her simple leather dress, her wrists still bearing faint marks of rope that had once defined her captivity. Those marks were a memory now. A reminder of who she had been. And who she refused to ever be again. The cowboy stepped outside with slow, careful steps. He knew what today meant. He had returned from the reservation council, from speaking to every elder who still held power. He had gone there not only to return Elena, if she wished it, but to stand before them and testify that she had been treated with dignity, protected with his life, and defended as an honored daughter of her people. He held a folded parchment in his hands. A treaty. A guarantee of peace. A promise that no Apache girl, woman, or elder would ever be handed away as payment, tribute, or bargaining chip again. And Elena, she was the reason it existed. When she saw the parchment, her lips parted. "They listened to you?" "No," the cowboy answered softly, lowering his head. "They listened to you. I only carried the message." She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden planks. "What message?" "That a chief's daughter isn't a thing to be traded," he whispered. "That she is a leader herself. That she deserves a voice. A future she chooses." A long silence stretched between them, filled only with the rising wind and the far-off cry of an eagle circling high above. Elena's chest tightened. All her life she had been told what her path would be, who she would marry, where she would live, how she would serve her people. But this man, this cowboy who had every right to see her as a burden, had instead given her something no one else ever had. Her freedom. Then the council accepted me back, she finally asked. They did, he said. With honor. Pride. And they want you home, Elena. She looked away. Not because she feared returning, but because she feared what leaving would do to her heart. And what about you? She whispered, unable to meet his eyes. The cowboy swallowed hard. The question cut deeper than he expected. I don't want you to go, he said quietly. But I won't hold you here. You're free. Truly free. Elena stepped forward until their foreheads were almost touching. You freed me, she said, voice trembling. But you're the one place I never felt like a prisoner. And then, with a certainty she had never felt before, she added, if I choose my future. I choose you. And in the golden morning light, with peace finally restored and her identity reclaimed, the daughter of a chief stepped into the arms of the cowboy who had changed her fate forever.